Why cognizer rather than cognition?
Because we're talking about a mind that realizes a particular object, right? So because there's a mind that realizes a particular object, we call it the cognizer, right? That's how we come to that term in English. But they're not just any cognizer. In this case, with Pramana is kind of a valid cognizer. Yes, we just said it's new, and also another aspect is incontrovertible. That means it completely understands its object, and that any superimposition has been eliminated, or any misunderstanding has been eliminated, and you cannot really fall back, so to say, from this insight. It's a very stable form of cognition, or a very stable form of realization of a particular topic of or object or event or reality. Yeah.
So cognizer, because it's actually knowing something. Valid, why valid? Why is it, what does valid mean here? Because, in Western philosophy, we might talk about, we're talking about knowledge here, right? And the acquiring knowledge. So we might say something is, some proposition is true, right? You have a belief that's true. So your knowledge can be true or false. But here we're talking about a cognizer that's valid. So what does valid mean here?
So valid here means, as I just said, is an incontrovertible aspect, right? So to know something is true, that also we can generate what we call a correct assumption. We're just assuming something, but it's a correct one. So it's in line with reality, but it's not a very stable one. Yeah. For example, thinking about permanence as our body or something like that. Yeah. The cosmetic industry plays with that and tries to sell us the shampoos and the creams because we grasp to permanence, right? And then you come to the Buddhist class and they tell you you're actually momentarily changing. So then you start to question this wrong understanding of reality of permanence with doubting it, generating a doubt. Maybe I am permanent, maybe I'm impermanent, right? And that breaks this single pointedness of the wrong view. And then this doubt generates eventually what we call a correct assumption, right? That you think, oh, I am momentarily changing. You look at a picture when you're 16, you look in the mirror, you say there's a change, and that didn't happen overnight. So that must have happened moment by moment, right? So that's kind of assuming consciousness and correct assuming consciousness. But it's not very stable yet because it didn't depend on a valid sign, as we call it, or valid reasoning to prove that you're impermanent because of the reason you are momentarily changing, right? So then this inference is being generated, and that inference actually realizes its object. So that's what we call a valid cognizer. Yeah, inference is a valid cognizer. So that goes a step further than this correct assumption, so to say.
Yeah. Okay, so we have pramana, which is a valid cognizer. We understand cognizer. We understand valid as being not only correct, but incontrovertible, meaning there's a stability and certainty to this cognizer, right? So, correct. Okay, so that's starting to unpack it for us. Now, you also mentioned this fresh or new. And so what does that have to do with this? Why would this cognizer have to be fresh or new?
Yeah, that's also very debatable, of course. I mean, in most schools of Buddhist philosophy, they say it has to be fresh or new because it's the initial moment and realizes something. Well, the second and subsequent moments are generated by depending on the first moment, having realized it. So they say for valid cognizer, or sometimes people translate it as prime cognizer, because of this aspect of new, that the initial moment is being called like that. Well, subsequent moments still realize its object, but not new or fresh. That's why we call them subsequent cognizers. But the consequent school, the Prasangika school, has a different interpretation. They just said incontrovertible by itself. Incontrovertible knower is the definition of a valid cognizer. It doesn't have to be new, for example.
Okay. So when we say that a pramana is a valid cognizer that's also new, new means new here is that it realizes its object through its own power. Could you say that?
Through its own power, through its own power in the sense that it doesn't depend on other form of consciousness, previous forms of consciousness, so to say.
It's not relying on the previous moment of consciousness, right? So
correct.
And so this may be a little bit obscure. So let's give examples, right?
Yeah.
So, and let's stick with perception, right? So I walk into the room, and well, you came on Zoom, right? And I saw you, right? And then I said, oh, there's Geshe, right? So then the second moment that I say, there's Geshe, that's not new? It's not using its own power. It's relying on the previous recognition of Geshe. Is that what is meant here?
Yeah, it's just a stream of, for example, you look at a screen, right?
Yep.
And you see an image, right? So the first moment you realize that image new or fresh.
Yeah.
The subsequent moments are related depending on the first moment. Yeah, and then of course you can debate if the screen, if I move around and you see various movements, if that's various types of consciousness that are new by themselves, right? That
Yeah.
we can debate. But if you just look at an object that is stable, then the initial moment is kind of fresh and new, and subsequent moments are these kind of subsequent cognizers. Yeah, and then you look the other direction and you look back, and then the first moment again is kind of new, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So why, so let's get back to Prasangika, who doesn't exactly explain it like this. Let's stick with Dharmakirti. Why would Dharmakirti care about this? It seems to me that he has a view of the world where everything is momentary, right? So if everything's momentary, then why is not every perception new?
Yeah, because I mean, momentary depends how you define momentary. If you think momentary in the sense every split second things are changing, right?
I think Dharmakirti would agree.
Yeah, so that we cannot really recognize or realize with our eye consciousness, so to say, right? We just have a collection of moments that makes the object, and from that point of view, we have to develop cognizer with regarding those moments of that particular object.